Senator Williams, I guess I could say I'm glad I wasn't in your shoes tonight, but you've done a fine job of representing your perspective. And I can't think of a piece of legislation that we've considered this session, or really in recent history, that I believe will be judged to be so unfair and so inequitable as this piece of legislation. And it was so glaring to me when I was watching Senator Hinojosa and you have exchanges, because it became so apparent that you will never, ever be confronted with the provisions of this legislation. Neither will I, Anglo, members of this body, and the Anglos we represent. It just will be unheard of for someone in Houston on a traffic violation to ask me to prove that I'm a U.S. citizen. We have to slow down and think about what we're about to do if this legislation is approved. Senator Hinojosa going to Corpus in a traffic violation, a veteran of the Vietnam War, an honorable member of this body, for the first time in our history, under state law, will have to prove that he's a U.S. citizen. I should be able to sit down right now, and that's enough said to stop this bad legislation. We must stop and consider what we're doing. I'll repeat it. Tommy, you and I, our family, our children, will never, ever have this law used against us, regardless of the probable cause for pulling us over. Senator Hinojosa will. And I'll discuss more what it will do to our Hispanic colleagues before I conclude. We have spent practically no time this afternoon, Senator Williams, talking about border security. Practically none. We have border cities under attack. Can't even cross the border as we used to for tourism. This legislation will do nothing to make our border safe. Juarez, Reynosa, Brownsville, Matamoros, they're all going to still be in fear. As long as you have crime south of the border, drug trafficking. Yesterday, the Mexican authorities arrested or apprehended 193 people in an 18-wheeler at the Guatemala-Mexican border. We haven't discussed those conditions at all. If I and all of us thought that your legislation would improve border security, we would unite. But we've spent practically none of the last half a dozen hours talking about border security, the cartel, the arms trafficking. What we have talked about are the streets and cities of Texas. It's amazing to me, Senator Williams, that you trust in your dialogue with senators, that you trust the police officers to ask the right questions. You put great confidence that they will implement and carry out the legislative intent of asking the right questions. Members, you didn't put the same trust in those officers and their chiefs and department administration that said, please don't pass this legislation. You can't have it both ways. You can't trust them to implement a bad law when they're against the law in the first place. They said it will damage public safety. We must slow down, members. I had members today say, why do y'all want to talk when you know the outcome? Because it's our moral duty. Very seldom, members, do we see a piece of legislation that will impact our citizens, documented and undocumented, like this piece of legislation will. It's our moral duty to stand up against discrimination. I can't think in my career of something that is close to this. Maybe hate crimes. And perhaps you can remind me of one. We're fixing to impact every Hispanic citizen of the state of Texas, documented and undocumented. We spent most of our time on the undocumented. But what about the Mexican Americans? What about the Cuban Americans? Any Hispanic in the state of Texas, a citizen of the United States, is going to have to prove for the first time in our history under state law that they're a citizen of the United States. I must comment briefly on some of the discussion in the committee. Some of the witnesses were challenged because they spoke Spanish, a proud language. U.S. citizens have been speaking it since the Battle of San Jacinto, and they were fighting on the Texas side. I go to Chapel Hills, a small community near Brenham, where they still have Catholic services in Polish to honor the seniors there. Been U.S. citizens for 60, 70, 80 years, Senator Williams, and they worship in Polish. If you go to Fredericksburg, it's Germany. If you go to West Texas, just north of Hillsboro, it's Czechoslovakia. They'll speak Czech in their services. Must be clarified that if you speak Spanish, it just means you're proud of your heritage. Let me quickly tell you why I'm emotional. I represent the Heights. My office is in the Heights. A young lady named Rosa was taking care of a family's children behind the office. The baby she's caring for, American family, and her 4-year-old would walk by the office, Tommy, try to cross Yale Street, and I couldn't stand to watch them cross a busy boulevard on their tricycle, so I ran out finally and said, "Ma'am, I'm Senator Whitmire. This is my office. You've got to pick up the tricycle and walk these kids across." I struck up a conversation. I found out that Rosa came to the United States 10 years ago from Mexico illegally, married a U.S. citizen from Peru, Peruvian American. He had left her, and she knew I was a government official. I gained her confidence, and she asked for help. She's undocumented. The sorry husband has left, and she's got a 4-year-old. She can't work. She's parking cars at night and doing the babysitting. I think, how can I help her, Tommy? I'll get her child support. I know the Attorney General's office. Guess what? She's afraid to access the courts to get child support that she's entitled to because she's undocumented. She got a U.S. citizen, 4-year-old Richard, and a sorry husband. And I have to advise her on the tough decision, can we chance going to court and seek child support because she's undocumented? What if he shows up, says, "Oh, that's my U.S. citizen son, I'll take care of him. She's illegal, return her." Think about this law, Tommy, and members. She'd be afraid to go to court now. We're actually trying to get her child support as I talk to you. Rosa came here when we welcomed immigrants. She's taking care of a U.S. family's baby, just as it was hers. Sorry U.S. American husband left her, and she can't seek child support and does part-time jobs. Fast forward to Maria. People brought Maria to my office. Maria came 12 years ago with her husband, got 3 sons, all attending public schools in Houston. Maria cleans houses. Maria pays taxes, never files for a return on her IRS payment. I alluded to Maria this afternoon, but I didn't go in detail. A year ago, last May, members, she owns a home. She's a leader in her church, Senator Patrick. She and her husband work, pay taxes, property taxes, sales taxes. Guess what? A year ago last May, she's turning left at a construction site, is pulled over, doesn't have a valid license, goes to jail, Harris County Jail, fingerprinted, determined to be undocumented. Last Mother's Day a year ago, she was in the detention center near Bush Airport and went 6 weeks without seeing her children. And you wonder, Senator Shapiro, why they compare it with the atrocities in history that would never reach the level that you and I know have been perpetrated. That's their atrocity. She was kept for 6 weeks, and she doesn't understand except she couldn't prove that she's a U.S. citizen. I spoke to her the other day. She's got a hearing in October. to see whether she and her family will be deported. I could go on and on. That's the face and the dilemma that we face tonight. I could cite Ana Hernandez's most moving speech in the House, where she says, as an undocumented child, her family would never leave the house together. The mother and father always made one stay behind in case one is apprehended. We just enhanced that 100% of the time. Families are going to be afraid to leave the house. They will always in the morning make provisions for who's going to pick up the kids. But if you're a single mom, like Rosa, she's picked up during the day. Who's going to pick up Richard at night? It is a mess, Senator Williams. And I understand the politics of it, but sometimes you just got to do the moral thing. And as Sam Houston would say, do the right thing and suffer the consequences. This is one of these times. If I can't persuade you, and I understand you don't swing a lot of votes with a talk in the Senate, but that don't mean you don't try. If I can't persuade you on the sound policy, the fairness, the equity of the issue, let me appeal to you on our religious convictions. I know we have believers on this Senate floor. And you know I don't like to put mine in public. But 1 John 4th chapter 20 and 21st verse says, if you say you love God who you cannot see, and you hate your brother who you can see, then you're a liar. For how can you love someone who you can't see and hate someone you can see? Senator Estes, I would appeal to our faith at this moment to remember documented and undocumented are our brothers and sisters. They're children of God. We're fixing to make a dramatic decision in each and every one of their lives. Let me close in opposition by putting a real face on this legislation. We spent most of the afternoon talking about the undocumented citizens. And I will quickly mention, before I forget it, the tragedy of the two Houston police officers, Senator Williams, that you properly paid respect to. Both Officer Johnson and Kevin Will were shot, one run over by DWI driver, both undocumented. Both had already been deported, one twice. Getting back to my discussion about border security. As long as there's criminals and disrespect for the law, you can pass all the laws you want to. These two criminals would pay no attention to your statute. In closing, we spent most of our time about the undocumented. Let's put a face on the U.S. citizens, the Mexican Americans. For the first time in Texas history, the people we represent, when they're pulled over, they're going to have to prove that they're U.S. citizens. It will not affect me. It will not affect the Anglos members of this body. But Senator Van Peet, will you stand up? Senator Rodriguez, Uristi, Hinojosa, would you please stand? Lucio, Zaffarini. Take a look at our colleagues, members. Mario Gallegos, retired firefighter, put his life on the line for all of us. Look at these members of the Senate. The first time one of them is pulled over the traffic or any probable cause, they're going to, for the first time in their life, a Vietnam War veteran, county official, I can go on and on, honorable, U.S. citizens, Uristi, a Marine. This legislation will force them to prove that they are U.S. citizens and they're honorable members of this body. Proud U.S. citizens, Texans. Members, we can do better. This is a sad day. Please realize what you're doing and vote no on this legislation.